Welcome to This Jungian Life. Three good friends and Jungian analysts, Lisa Marciano, Deborah Stewart, and Joseph Lee, invite you to join them for an intimate and honest conversation that brings a psychological perspective to important issues of the day.
I'm Lisa Marciano, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Philadelphia.
I'm Joseph Lee, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Virginia Beach, Virginia.
I'm Deborah Stewart, a Jungian analyst on Cape Cod.
And today we're going to be probing the topic of dreams. Why do we care about them? What do we know about them? Why do they matter?
Wow. Well, I'm thinking that, in Jungian theory, as an overall kind of broad brush description, the idea is to establish more of a connection, more dialogue between consciousness and the unconscious. Jungian analysis does not work only with the ego, only with consciousness. We want that depth, and we want to achieve it in ourselves so that we have access to more of ourselves. And dreams are a good way to establish more access. It's not the only way to dialogue with the unconscious, but we dream 4 or 5 times a night, so dreams are a wonderful well that fills every night, and that we can and do dip into if we can awaken from a dream and get it written down or recorded in some way. And oftentimes people have a dream just before waking. So it's a very rich source of information from the unconscious, which is central to Jungian analysis.
I'd like to add that Jung had a very clear thought about the necessity for dreams in order for us to have psychological balance. That in our waking life, the dominant force is the ego, the waking attitudes, the orientation towards life, and that in order for us to even move forward in this outer world, there are tremendous alternative ways of thinking and being that have to be put aside, that can't be experienced. It's in the dream life that the ego is forced, through the drama of the dream, to experience the other side of their options, the other sides of the attitudes which they may not be living out, and the other hidden sides of various circumstances. And that movement between the waking life and the unlived life in the dreams combine to keep us balanced, to keep a homeostatic feeling that we're not going too far. And by too far, I mean not leaving our natural, organic way of being that generates from the soul.
It occurs to me as you say that, Joseph, that one thing that I like to bring in when working with dreams, because sometimes someone will bring in a dream and they'll say, "Well, I had this dream last night, but I know what it means," and I'll think, "Well, tell it to me anyway, because maybe we don't know what it means." And Jung said that dreams will always tell us something we don't know. So, if you wake up, it is like you were saying, it's the other side. If we wake up and we think, "Oh, I know what that means," pretty much guarantee you don't know, you don't understand the dream yet.
Mm-hmm. And that whether or not we interpret a dream, the fact that we dream keeps us in a certain state of balance. But when we can bring the dream to consciousness and try to open up the meaning of the dream, that balancing effect of the dream is enhanced tremendously and can even heal us and heal tremendous symptoms in our personality.
I think about Jung saying that in each of us there is another whom we do not know. He speaks to us in dreams and tells us how differently he or she sees the situation from how we consciously see it ourselves. So I'm thinking of this in the context of you saying, "Okay, this was a really boring dream and I get it." No. There's something here that is not known. Otherwise, psyche the dream maker wouldn't bother to send the dream. And that dreams speak to us, according to Jung, in a different language. For Freud, they were a disguise. But for Jung, they're simply a different language in image and affect that we can learn to understand.
You know, you're bringing up Freud and how he thought differently about dreams. Makes me think of something that this is sort of gets into a place of real importance and meaning for me, which is that, you know, we certainly, I think, have a lot of direct experiences of the unconscious. Like we forget things, we're surprised by what we forget. It's like, oh God, you know, I forgot that. We can sort of intuit. I mean, I don't think anyone's really refutes the idea that there is an unconscious, right? And Freud, of course, said that the unconscious is where things go when we repress them or forget them. Jung felt that that was true, but he also felt that the unconscious could give life to new creative impulses and meaning. So it was both this sort of garbage pit, and it was also kind of a font of renewal. And you know, that is such a beautiful idea. And I obviously espouse it as a Jungian analyst. But the truth is that, you know, you're like, well, is it really true? But I'll tell you something. Sitting with dreams is daily proof that that is true. That for me and for, I think, people in analysis is like direct experience of the wisdom of the unconscious. Because I'll tell you something. I know that in scientific circles, there's an assertion that dreams don't mean anything. But I am as certain as I can possibly be that dreams are meaningful. I see it again and again and again, and I have no doubt of that.
I'm remembering way back when I entered an analytic process, a Jungian analytic process, and the therapist who was in Jungian training or would be in Jungian training wanted to work with dreams. And I thought, well, you know, okay, I guess one of us has a game plan. I don't know. So let's go with your idea. And I would I had access to dreams, and I would bring in a dream every week. But I didn't really connect to the dream. And then one time I had a dream that was different. It was different in feeling tone. And I said something like, but this is my dream. And that sense of renewal and connection and depth was profound for me. Mm-hmm. That something went on in me or through me every night and generated something so meaningful. I was companioned.
It is really like a nightly miracle.
Yes.
I like your image of it's a well that refills every night.
Yes. And the inner companion. Jung writes about the inner companion and the treasure hard to attain. And that was one reason for the Jungian process for me. I kind of literalized it, but I thought, I want one of those. I'd like an inner companion and some treasure. That would all be very good. And there it really was.
Yeah. So what about someone who comes in and says, oh, I don't really dream?
Oh, well, everybody dreams. So that's just a physiological fact. It's a natural psychic process, according to Jung. Everybody dreams. I start often with people who say, I don't remember my dreams. What is the intention here? Is there an intention, and do you have a sincere wish? It doesn't have to be deep or especially intense, but just a sincere desire to receive a dream, to remember a dream. I would really like to have this happen to me. To start there, of turning the proverbial friendly face toward the unconscious, and to get a dream notebook. It doesn't have to be expensive. It can be something that you get at the pharmacy store, your CVS, but make sure it's the right size for you. And make sure the cover is the right color for you. Put it on your bedside table with a pen or pencil, and then ask as you go to sleep that night, I would really appreciate it very much if you would send me a dream. And if you will send me a dream, I will write it down, as much of it as I can. Psyche loves to be attended to, loves to be paid attention to, and will send the dream. So before one wakes up, I find it helpful to people to kind of go over consciously what the dream was. First, I was in this place, I was with so-and-so, then we went here, then someone else came in. Sort of just review it in your own mind and then write it down. And if something else comes to you of, I think the color there was green, or I think it was, there was a car that came along, just go with it and just keep writing. Don't overthink it. And catch what you can. It might just be an image of a dream at first. So it takes a little practice and a willingness, and it can be hard to overcome the impulse to just let it disappear again, let it sink below the surface. And that takes a little practice and some intention as well.
Just want to add to that I have found that, if you put that dream journal next to your bed and you wake up and say that you even just have a fleeting sense that you did dream, but you got nothing more than that. If you write down, I know I had a dream I can't remember, pretty good chance that the next day you'll remember something.
I agree. I'll have people even enter no dream, but
that's
just
a good idea.
going to
That's
the
a
dream
good idea,
journal
right.
seems to
It's like a
stimulate.
placeholder.
Absolutely. And just in terms of technology, I know some of you don't want to have to sit and write for 30 minutes. Use the speech to text function on your phone. You'll capture the wide majority of it, and then there it is.
Yes, and I've experimented with there are some dream journal apps, and for a little while I kept my dreams in Evernote, and I've finally gone back to pen and paper though, but I've tried different things.
And what I've found is there's a translation of going through the dream in your own head, and then for me, of writing it down where more comes.
Yes.
It's kind of like doing a rubbing. So the first part where you're still in bed, remembering the dream and kind of going through it is like the first rubbing. And then the writing of it can bring up more and more. And very often people will say, and here's the part, I forgot that this happened. So the bringing it up, and I like the writing. I would say whatever works for you, absolutely. But there's something about the tactile holding of a pen and paper and having a journal that says to Psyche, I have a special place to put these dreams. But again, find your own way with intention to bring dreams into consciousness.
So I'm thinking, there's, kind of imagining what listeners might want to know. And I'm thinking we could talk a little bit about sort of what Jung thought about dreams or what the basic principles of dream interpretation are, or we could talk about how we learn to work with dreams, what that process was like for us.
Oh my goodness, I can hardly remember what the specific steps to it were, except that I remember being so perplexed and thinking, I just don't know. I don't know where to begin. I don't know how to think about it. And what helped me at the beginning was Jung's idea that the dream is like theater. And that in the dream, the dreamer is the playwright and the actors, the director, the sets, and all of it, of thinking about the dream as a play, as a drama. and what the feeling state that was evoked in the dream was.
Yeah, that always feels like a really important part to me. I sort of gotten to the point where it's really difficult for me to work with a dream unless I know what the dreamer, like what were the emotions in the dream, you know?
And that's a play, that the dreams are affect images. We feel something when we go to a play.
Mm-hmm.
And then later I remembered thinking of the parts of the psyche, of which parts are the dreamer's shadow, which parts are maybe persona, which parts are opposites, etc. That deepened it for me into how does this reflect different parts of the dreamer's psyche?
To me, that was the pivotal change. I think in my own analysis, the relational experience of the analysis was primary, and then the value of dreams came on later in my personal process. But I think that when I was exposed to Jung's way to decode a dream, and the ways to look at the different parts of the dream and how that would be mapped onto the psyche, that seemed like the most miraculous secret. It was stunning to me and seemed just incredibly relevant. So in the spirit of continuing to learn about Jung's way of decoding the dreams, there were a couple of really profound ideas that were so important. One is the way that we orient to a dream in as much as is the dream reaching back into our early childhood and pointing out a piece of work that we didn't resolve, or is the dream reaching forward, telling us where we're going or what the next step is? And Jung preferenced the idea of reaching forward and not getting trapped excessively in the past. And he called that the teleologic point of view. And that's, I think, unique to Jungian analysis.
Yeah, I sort of take that for granted, actually. And so it's like, oh, yeah, that's right. Some people sort of, think it refers back to childhood. I mean, it's not that it can't or that it, never does. But in general, like the dream is visiting you because it has something it wants you to know for the future.
To move you.
Yes, and let's clarify that when a dream reaches back into childhood or evokes a memory of something that happened when you were 5 years old or in the third grade, it's because that is a piece of unfinished business that is still alive in you now. It's not about your literal past. It's about something in your current situation is evoking this kind of complex or issue that is still alive and is asking to be resolved in the psyche so that it can move you forward.
Mm-hmm. The other idea I want to introduce, and then we can certainly move into a dream interpretation, maybe discuss this more, is the idea of what a symbol is. And this was another very important advancement that Jung brought to dream interpretation, that previously Freud and the early analysts had fixed meanings that were often associated to images that would come up in a dream, and something that's common is, I think I said a parapraxis there, comic and common, is that anything that was long and straight was somehow a phallic symbol.
It's sort of like everything, winds up sort of being phallic.
Some kind of a sexual metaphor. And the early Freudians were limited and married to this, what I think of as a limited interpretation. But Jung felt that that was way too narrow, and that the images in the dreams were symbols which could have multiple meanings, and that each person's psyche had their own unique symbolic language, and that we needed to help the client understand how this symbol was alive inside of them, and from a position of humility, understanding that there is always a deeply mysterious and perhaps never fully revealed aspect to these images. And one more piece that I know I have found very important in my entering into a client's dream as they're reporting it to me is that I feel certain that symbols move psychological energy around in the personality.
It organizes it.
It organizes it, but moves it. So particularly as the dream ego, as the person comes in contact with these different images, I really feel that something is imparted into the ego that changes them, that moves them forward. And that particular visualization helps me see how the dream might be changing someone.
One symbol that comes up repeatedly in work, especially with women, is the symbol of the house. And it's not the only one, of course, but what kind of house does the person live in? Symbolically, is the person living in a hut, in a ranch house, in a castle? All these kinds of symbols of what is containing me, where do I live, very important. And that it changes, and it's not fully understood, but the function of that symbol is to help the person understand, and in a way that's enlivened, of, oh my goodness, I'm living in a tent. And how does that feel? It might feel great. I'm in the outdoors and here I am close to nature. Or it might feel, oh my goodness, this is really not a stable container for me.
And I feel like this is right now a fascinating moment of the psyche revealing itself because, Deb, you're relocating.
I'm relocated
to a new house.
Yes.
And so in the outer world and in the inner world, the idea of what it means and the transformation of the image of the house and the home is alive and on the move.
So picking up on this idea about a symbol, about a place, and maybe transforming, it's interesting to point out that one of the things that we look for in an analytic process is a dream series and the way that a particular symbol might appear and change and shift, and we can really track what's happening in the. It's almost like when you work with someone over a period of time with dreams, there becomes a kind of common language. You know, it's like, oh, you had that dream again about being in Scotland. Well, we kind of have a sense of what that means, and the unconscious kind of knows that we know what it means. So it goes back to pick up Scotland, and then there we are. It's our shorthand. I'll share one of my dream series that there's a bit of humor to it is, you know, I have an office in which I see my patients, and when I was in training and building my practice, my dream office was it was just a shambles. You know, it was in the same place that my actual office is, but it just was like, it was unfinished. There were, you know, sort of, you know, unpainted drywall. It always looked really awful. And then interestingly, around the time that I finished analytic training, I had this dream about this beautiful space with a fireplace and stained glass windows. It was really gorgeous. Now my current dream office looks better than the shambles that it used to be. But there's still a part of it that isn't finished yet. And there's all this stuff and kind of junk stored there. And periodically I'll have a dream where a client wanders back into the part where I'm storing various and sundry things. And so my professional life continues to be a work in progress, I suppose. So
'tis ever thus.
Yes.
So with that, let us perhaps move on to consider a dream that one of our listeners has sent in.
So our listener is a 49-year-old female, and she has just gone through a personal transformation that she reports here in the form. She has left a full-time job, and she is caring for a loved one who is taken ill, that she's had to forestall a number of important projects and forward-looking plans in order to be a caregiver. And she reports this dream. I ran into a male friend who I have not seen for a few years in the lobby of a ridiculously high-end hotel. For some reason, I was wearing only a towel. He asked me to join him in his room, which was called the Mermaid Aquarium, along with a female friend of his who was already in the room. Somewhere along the line in the hotel lobby, he bought me an orange-scented perfume. I found his room. I just remember entering the room and seeing two nude women lying on the bed wearing exotic jewelry, and then I woke.
So I have to say that if I had this dreamer here, my first question would be, tell me about your friend. But we don't, of course, have that information.
So it's what we know is that the situation here, the dream situation, the setting, is a male friend and in the lobby of a ridiculously high-end hotel.
Yes. Let's talk about hotels.
Yes. Well, hotels are places where one is transient.
Yes.
You don't live in a hotel.
Nope, you're just
traveling.
passing through.
You're passing through. Exactly. And she says it's a ridiculously high-end hotel. So something that is over the top, over-decorated, and expensive. And she's not experiencing as luxurious and wonderful. It's ridiculous.
That's interesting, yeah. You know, I do find that hotel imagery turns up in dreams a fair amount, and I think it often carries, it's not a fixed symbol like you were saying before, but it often kind of comes with that sense that this is not a place that I'm investing in, that I'm staying, that I'm putting down roots. This is something I'm just sort of passing through.
Yes, and I think to support this idea of it being transient, that the rest of the event in the dream seems to be not driven by the ego, but driven by the male companion. So it's not something that it feels like she's investing in with any sense of permanency.
And then I appreciate the contrast of her being in this ridiculously high-end hotel wearing only a towel.
Yes. It's a little humorous.
It's humorous, and it's also another very common image is people suddenly looking down and they're naked in a dream, or that they're only wearing their underwear. And often the feeling that comes across with that is just being very vulnerable, being very exposed. It would be interesting to ask this dreamer what she felt, but I could imagine that if any of us were suddenly in the lobby of the Bellagio in a towel, not expecting to be in a towel with nothing else under it, that would be intense. That's a very vulnerable way to be in such an environment.
So 2 parts of the psyche are in very different places. The high-end hotel and wearing only a towel, where she then runs into this male friend who I have not seen for a few years.
And she runs into him. There's this feeling of fate, of fatefulness and unplannedness to it that I think is interesting. So he asks her up to his room, which he calls the Mermaid Aquarium. So the male figure is having a tremendous influence because she does follow him. There's something very magnetic, influential about him. And we'll examine the idea of mermaids, but that she is being invited into an aquarium. I think is very powerful. When we think about aquariums, I had an aquarium as a kid. You know, it's a cage where you take something that normally would be in the wild or be free, has been captured, and there's this artificial environment is created as it becomes a pet, as it becomes owned by someone.
Well, and a ridiculously high-end hotel could be sort of that kind of artificial environment where you go,
Yes.
For kind of a respite.
And that you're observed. Aquariums are made out of transparent glass, generally speaking. So the outside people can gawk. You're on display.
It feels like a place of fantasy.
Yeah.
That what do we keep in aquariums? Well, not usually mermaids, but exotic fish.
So that's good, and I think it goes with, I'm getting that kind of read off the whole dream because it's a ridiculously high-end hotel. There's a mermaid aquarium, orange scented perfume, and then the word exotic is even in the dream, that there are these nude women lying on the bed wearing exotic jewelry.
Yes.
So there does seem to be, this is my hot take on the dream. I'm sort of going to jump the gun here and go right to my sort of intuitive take, is this does seem to be sort of a place of fantasy, and the dreamer does report positive feelings about the dream, sort of mildly positive feelings about the dream. And I, it sounds like her waking life has been a little bit hard recently.
She's caretaking a significant other.
And she's had to put her own goals on hold for a while. So this might be a case of what Jung called compensation, where the dream the unconscious brings the thing that's missing from the conscious situation, which in this case would be a little bit of fantasy.
Yes.
And sensual fantasy. I mean, I don't know if she means orange, flower scented perfume, which is just deliriously delicious, that smell, or orange, like, more sort of the fruit. But there's a sensuality to this dream. I mean, honestly, the wearing a towel thing is interesting because I actually didn't connect immediately with the sense of embarrassment and shame, although of course, that's there. But to me, it was more kind of sensual, to be wearing a towel is.
What I'm thinking about is what Joseph said about that the rest of the dream doesn't seem to be where the dream ego is really running the show. Mm-hmm. And that, so there's this sort of persona thing of the hotel, this ridiculously high-end hotel, mm-hmm. and then the kind of semi-nakedness of wearing only a towel. And then this, I agree with you, this compensatory action of the dream of going to the guy's room. It's called the mermaid aquarium. There's a female friend. There are two female figures wearing only exotic jewelry. They're nude. It really feels like the unconscious is engaging in an escape from the usual, one would assume, the usual sort of heavy reality that the dreamer may be living in with all the caretaking responsibilities.
And it has a really interesting tone of a kind of late 1950s noir movie. Remember those movies where, you'd go to the nightclub and there would be a wall of glass and women would pretend to be mermaids and inhale air out of these fake, you can see this, out of these fake strands of kelp. And, you go down to Florida and South Beach in the 1950s and you would buy orange blossom perfume.
Oh, would you
that
really?
That was a thing.
I didn't know that.
And these, wonderful moments where these 1950s starlets would come out of the pool in their bathing suits and they would wrap themselves right at the chest with a little bit of a towel, a modesty towel. Yeah. There's something very regressive. There's something about going back into the time when women were objectified, when men, a kind of 007 character invites you into his harem.
Yes.
And you become a mermaid, an exotic mermaid in a tank, doused in orange perfume. and when you think about this, she's 49, she's actually young. This is an old image of how the feminine was mythologized.
And it's all very over the top, just like the ridiculously high-end hotel. So that may be the compensatory function, that all this is way over the top to compensate for what is extremely heavy, difficult,
and I'm going
sad.
to go a little Freud here too. Okay, not something I usually do.
There are these sudden little Freudian innuendos that are flying through the room.
But they're all visuals, so they don't really translate. So what I was going to say is, we don't know this for sure, okay? But the person she's caretaking who's ill is her boyfriend or her significant other. So perhaps if he has been ill, there hasn't been a lot of sex. There's a lot of sort of sexual imagery in this dream.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Can we talk about mermaids?
Yes, let's talk about mermaids.
Because this is the mermaid aquarium. And I see mermaids as a kind of over the top or, down in the unconscious, but very regressed image of the feminine. And they're not sexual. The bottom half of the mermaid from the waist down is fish and tail, and they're lovely and they're young, but they don't have to be sexual. They can be very alluring to others. Again,
to go Freudian, sort of like a pre-genital sexuality.
Yes.
Well, and they're kind of idealized and adored, but they're not really engaged in a sense. So for her to be invited into the mermaid aquarium, and this might feel safer to the dreamer, is that she might become an adored mermaid object, but she wouldn't have to be fully sexually engaged by the other figure.
And mermaids really don't have any responsibilities except to swim around and be beautiful.
Yeah.
So I guess what we're really circling around is the highly compensatory nature of this dream and how important it may be for the dreamer to have a holiday.
Yeah.
From her life that's hard.
Absolutely. And to become a mermaid in an aquarium and to perform and to swim and dance in the waves, and even the modern images of Ariel being a kind of Cinderella figure.
Yes, Ariel.
There's a lot of very fantastical but perhaps exciting potential in the dream. And although we're being high-spirited a little bit here in the room, on a very serious note, her life is really hard, or it sounds like it is really, really hard. And in order to stay the course, in order to finish whatever she feels her responsibilities are in her daily life, that the dream maker is being encouraging and, in a sense, merciful.
Yes.
To provide an exuberant, exciting. It's as if it's a film set.
Yes.
Where amazing, over the top things can happen, and she's invited into a harem where beautiful women are lounging around, dressed always in jewelry. Well, what an enormous relief that is, and it fuels the whole Harlequin romance world of publishing. This ability to get lost in an exotic, over-the-top story as a way of compensating for, having a difficult life.
Yes. And a life in which she is sacrificing her next step in life of going back to school.
Well, what we hope is that she's postponing it.
Right.
She's had to sacrifice it for now.
The timing has been sacrificed, postponing. And so the compensatory function is to be really so indulged.
Yeah.
On the other end.
Nice. Right.
If you can have everything, you can be in the mermaid aquarium, and you too can wear exotic jewelry and lie around in the nude.
Beautiful perfume.
And wear orange-scented perfume. Yeah. And it's a necessary balancing for what her daily life may be like.
And it also can be surprising that, the dreamer in the conscious life might be a feminist. She might actually rail against those kind of visions of the feminine, or how women were treated in the wiki-watchy spring shows where women were literally kind of swimming around in tanks and performing. But in the unconscious, those images still communicate a value to her, which are important.
Yes.
So that feels like a pretty good place to leave it. We want to thank you for joining us. Thank you very much to the dreamer who offered us this dream. come on over and visit us at thisjungianlife.com. You can leave some feedback. You can check out other episodes. And you, too, can submit your dream, and perhaps we will analyze it on a future episode. Let's see. Make sure that you follow us on Twitter and like us on Facebook. And until next time, keep living this Jungian life.
You've been listening to This Jungian Life. From our website, thisjungianlife.com, you can follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, help us produce future episodes by funding us through Patreon, and submit your dreams for possible interpretation on another episode. We'd like to thank our listener who shared a dream for today's show and hope you'll let us know what topics you'd enjoy hearing more about. Until next time, keep living this Jungian life.